Among his many critical and commercial successes are films as varied as No Country for Old Men, Doubt, The Truman Show, and my personal favorite, Zoolander. He has the distinct honor of being responsible for not just one, but two of the best movies of the last year, True Grit and The Social Network. Please welcome Scott Rudin. Thank you both so much for being here today. I know you're very busy, and it's very kind of you. You only have 8 more movies coming out next month, right?
A few.
I want to start at the beginning with Scott, because from what I've heard, you could almost make a movie about the making of this movie. Mm-hmm. I believe you first became interested in the subject matter when you read a book proposal by Ben Mesrick, The Accidental Billionaires.
Right. Yeah. I read this and loved the subject, and I had thought for a long time about doing a movie about what happened to Larry Summers at Harvard. And I was interested in the idea of Harvard as a kind of gender ecosystem, and I worked for a long time trying to figure out if there was a movie in that story, and decided that there wasn't. So when this proposal came in, it had a lot of elements of what I had been interested in previously, and at the same time, I was looking at it. I had a breakfast with Aaron Sorkin and said, we'd talked about working together over the last few years, and I said to him, is there any subject you're interested in writing about? And he said, yeah, I'd like to write about the internet. So it was this sort of extraordinarily fortuitous timing. And at the same time, Dana Brunetti and Mike DeLuca had worked with Mesrick, unbeknownst to me, had worked with Ben on developing the proposal, and they had gone to Sony with it. At the same time, I went to Sony with Aaron and the proposal, so Amy Pascal very generously put us all together, and Mike and Dana let me into what was essentially their project.
Well, I guess it was generous of them, but you do bring something to the table, don't you?
Well, they had it without me. I mean, they didn't need me to do it, but they really were very decent and generous, and they didn't need to be, so I'm very grateful to them.
And I believe you originally did try to get Facebook's cooperation or Mark Zuckerberg's cooperation?
I spent about 6 months, Aaron Sorkin and I spent about 6 months trying to figure out if there was a way to work together with Facebook. And we had many meetings with various executives at Facebook, and at the end of which I said, Aaron and I have done our research and we're ready to start work. Are you with us or not? What would it take for you guys to play with us? And they said, if it weren't said at Harvard and it wasn't called Facebook. And so I said, I think this conversation has come to an end. Thank you. We'll see you when we're done. And but the great thing was, I think it turned out to be a kind of very lucky thing for the movie that we didn't have their cooperation, because I think we wouldn't have been able to make the movie we made. But beyond that, the lucky byproduct of it was that I pledged a kind of transparent relationship with them. So I said to them, we'll talk to you about questions we have. We'll show you the script when it's ready. You can read every draft, and we'll show you the movie. And if you have thoughts, you can share your thoughts. We won't make any commitment to you to listen to you or to do anything you ask us to do, but we'll hear you. And that turned out to be very good, and they actually were very contributive to certain aspects of the movie that we didn't know that much about. And that was great.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. I don't think either Aaron or I really understood what hacking was. And the fact that Mark Zuckerberg was first and foremost a hacker was something we didn't really know that much about. And it was very hard to research because it's illegal. So you couldn't find hackers to talk to you. And the other thing that we didn't entirely understand, which the Facebook guys were fantastically helpful with, was Aaron and I are both Luddites. And we really didn't understand what code writing was. So I had to call, there's a guy named Elliot Schrage, who is the head of communications at Facebook, and I had to call him at one point and say, can you explain to me, I know Mark invented Facebook. What exactly did he do? Besides having the idea to do it, what did he do? And what is the thing he's great at? And they explained that what he was great at is code writing. And they walked us through what code writing meant. And code writing is the basis of everything that Facebook's done. And I think we would have mucked it up pretty severely if it hadn't been for their help in that.
And at what point did you bring on the great David Fincher to direct?
Interestingly, David and I were talking together about doing another movie. Did you know this? I'm not sure you know this. Okay. We were talking about doing a movie that I'm starting a movie in the next few weeks with Stephen Daldry that Tom Hanks and Sandy Bullock are going to do. And I had been talking to David about doing it. It's a script by Eric Roth, who had done Benjamin Button with David, and they're good friends. And I got 25 pages of Aaron Sorkin's script, which really basically was the entire first night of the story. And I called David and said, "You're doing the wrong movie, do this movie, this one's yours." And I said, "Don't take a job. I think I'm about 2 months away from having the script, but I think this is a movie you should make."
Why did you think of him? It is a perfect fit, but I'm curious what initially made you
I
think
think
of him.
there's a kind of anarchist heart to this material, and I think David is fundamentally an anarchist. and I knew enough about David to know that he had a particular experience of early success and, had become a sort of superstar director of videos when he was, how old was he when you met him?
22.
Right. So, I mean, he's been a major filmmaker for a long time, but I knew enough about him to know that he had been through that feeling of early success and that sense that, which I think is a big part of what this movie is about, that your fantasy of success isn't the same as what success actually feels like. And I think that's a big idea at the center of the film, and I had an instinct that he would know that. But also that he's a brilliant director, and I think someone who's been hugely underrated as only a visualist. And there's a side of David that's a kind of brilliant anthropologist, and I think that's what he did here. He got himself into every single corner of this material. He learned about Harvard, he learned about Palo Alto. By the end of it, he was like, as I think I said to him once, "You're like the Margaret Mead of Mark Zuckerberg."
At this point, I want to talk about the casting of the film because you basically got every great young actor in their 20s for this movie.
Credit to Laray. It's all her doing.
And your association with David Fincher goes back many years. I believe you first worked with him on a Jodie Watley video.
Yeah, I actually, believe it or not, met David the first day I came to LA in 1986.
Wow. Fortuitous.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about collaborating with him? What does he look for in actors when you're working on a project together?
Well, David's, the most amazing director to collaborate on with casting because he adores actors. He loves actors. And he's very knowledgeable about actors. And so we, it depends on, we always look for people who are incredibly talented and who have great work ethic, of course. But depending upon the material, there are different things, that you need. This particularly, it was quite exciting because we got to, we first started out looking for the young actors, which, was incredible because you get to really meet lots and lots of people, which we all enjoy that process so very, very much, and spend a lot of time with young actors. And, it's exciting. It's very, very exciting. It can be challenging because of the sheer numbers, of young people who are actors, and but it's great, and of course there's nothing more satisfying than to be able to put those actors in a room with David, because it's everything that you would ever hope that could be as a casting director, and everything that an actor would ever hope for it to be too. So it's great.
There was I think also a huge need for people who were verbally dexterous in this.
Oh, yes.
It's like His Girl Friday. It's a 170-page script that made a slightly less than 2-hour movie, and that I think has all to do with the remarkable language capacity of the principal cast, especially Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah.
Just the ability to get that sort of Sorkin music to happen took an enormous amount of work and instinct and skill.
And of course, because of that, there was a great energy that went with the whole process, because Aaron's it's incredibly energetic. It's fast-paced, it's sharp, and so that was very, very fun and really exciting, because from the beginning all the way through the end, that energy never dissipated at all.
For those of you who don't know, Scott actually began his career in casting and has always had a great eye for talent. So was it the two of you and David? Were there other people heavily involved in the casting? Did you see everyone who auditioned?
It was real. I think Laray and David, much
Yeah,
more than me in this instance.
Well, Scott obviously is, an incredible resource for me and quite another person who loves actors as well as I do. So it was a wonderful group to be together. But the casting process with David and I, because we have done it for quite a long time, is very intimate. But it's certainly, something we talk about, lots of actors, and we talk about lots of things. And Scott is an incredible resource to me, not only because of his taste and his eye, but he is so knowledgeable and, really helps me at times where, to dig as deep as we really want to, meet everybody that we possibly can. And that's
We saw an unbelievable number of people.
Unbelievable number of people, but it's really exciting to do that. And,
The great thing was, I think, in this process, I knew David and Laray were seeing an enormous number of people, and I thought, I can ask to insert myself in this process, or I can trust that one day it will come to me. And lo and behold, every, about 4 or 5 weeks into looking, occasionally I would get a note from David saying, I've posted something for you on the pick system. Take a look at Jesse Eisenberg. I think we have found Mark, and without having to, it took me a long time as a producer to learn that you are not necessary to every part of the process.
Really?
Yeah, and it's hard to learn because your fantasy is, you start out as a producer, your fantasy is that nothing can happen without you, and of course you realize that everything can happen without you. And that's great because you can then make some more movies. But in this instance, because Laray and David had worked together on so many films, they have a shorthand, and all I wanted to be able to do was just to make sure that Laray had the help she needed every place, that we had enough bodies on to cover New York and cover Chicago and cover Toronto and cover London, and because these parts are incredibly demanding, and there's nothing in this movie but the acting. That's all there is, and and the quality of the ensemble, and the ensemble being able to be on one page together, and that took an enormous amount of work. So my job was simply make sure that there's enough of a nest underneath the two of them that they can do what they need to do.
I've been a fan of Jesse Eisenberg's for years. I mean, since Roger Dodger, I guess. He's fantastic. I was still surprised at how good he was in this movie. What made you guys think of him? And I understand he auditioned on tape.
He did. He was in New York, which is the wonderful thing about the internet. And let me just say to all of you right now, if anybody says that you never get booked off tape, it's not true. It's very important. If you can't get in the room, it's great to get in the room, but if you cannot, get on tape. We, of course, were familiar with Jesse's work, predominantly from The Squid and the Whale, and then Fred Durst is a friend of David's who directed The Education of Charlie Banks, and I worked on that movie as well, so we got to know a lot more about Jesse during that time. And, Jesse is just one of those people that the second you saw what he did, first it just makes you smile because you're like, oh my gosh, he's so incredible and so facile. And the language, he just had it, he just energetically, creatively, and it was quite exciting to see. It was quite exciting. We were all very much looking forward to meeting him in person.
I think he's also remarkably, in a funny way, I think he's remarkably like David in that, and I think that's one of the things that David responded to about the character of Mark Zuckerberg and about Jesse, which is that David is capable of keeping 19 things going on at any time. He's always got 19 conversations happening, and so does Mark Zuckerberg, and so does Jesse. Jesse is brilliant at the kind of fractal thinking that is so specifically what David wanted in the part, and very much what Aaron brought to it.
And also how present he is in every moment, which David is exactly the same way, no matter what is going on and where his focus is. At that moment, you have his undivided attention, and Jesse has that same sharpness about him. It was great, really fun.
And I understand you sort of were interested in Jesse early on, but you still saw hundreds, maybe even thousands of people.
Yeah. Yes, we did. But you know what? I think that is the fair way to cast. I think it's for me, it's what I love to do. See everybody who's interested, everybody who's available, everybody knows that one person's going to get each job. But the more familiar that directors, producers, casting directors can become with your work, that is a great thing. That is not a bad thing. So maybe some people think that it's not great to see so many people. I think it's a really good thing to do, because you know that you have the absolute appropriate best actors for the roles, but you've also really educated yourself, and I think that's a very important thing for me as a casting director. I do on every job. I want to see everybody that's new and interested, and it's great. I love it.
I think also in a movie like this, where you're looking at, in some cases, very inexperienced actors, giving people the chance to come in again and have repeated shots at it was fantastic. It's something we did a lot on Drink and Tattoo as well.
And we do that a lot. Our process it's very intimate, it's very involved, it's very lengthy, but it grows. It is a growing process that is so much fun for everybody that's involved. And also, in this particular movie, there are a lot of kids in this movie. So maybe somebody who came in at first and read for one role maybe didn't end up being
Andrew is a
exactly
perfect
right
example
for
of that.
role. Then they're right for something else. And so, almost everybody got a role, actually, so it worked out great.
Yeah. I mean, Andrew, perfect example, came in early on as a Mark contender and ended up playing, I think, a part that's equally as good as the role of Mark.
Actually, Andrew said he never even read Eduardo's sides. He always just read the Mark part, and you guys gave him Eduardo?
He did the read. Didn't he do the read-through?
Oh, yeah,
he did. That's my memory of it.
He did do the read-through as Eduardo, yeah.
And I know actors will love to hear this. Can you tell us about how you were familiar with Andrew?
I saw Andrew in a couple of plays in London. I'd seen Andrew in a play called Chat Room, which was a one-act play that was done it was part of the National Theatre education program. So it was literally a one-act play that was done for school kids. And I had read the play and was interested in the play, and I bought a ticket when I was in London and thought, this kid is astonishing. I mean, he's like an emotional empath. He can show everything that he's feeling at any given time. I mean, I think, a really astonishing actor. And then I saw him in another play by a guy named J.T. Rogers, and at one point I was trying to make Cavalier and Clay with Stephen Daldry, and although we didn't get the movie made, we had cast him in it, in the lead. So when this came up, he was really, when we had been working on the script, he was somebody I had always thought about as a very possible Mark. And Laray and David went through this process of looking at who Mark was, and David called me and said, I think I'd like to ask Andrew to play Eduardo, but how do I do this since he's been coming in as Mark for all this time? And I said, I have never seen anyone who's been insulted by an offer of a great part and a great script. Call him up and ask him.
Great director, yeah.
Yeah. So.
And how smart do you guys look? Because by the time this movie came out, he'd done Never Let Me Go and Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. I mean, and now he's Spider-Man.
I mean, the fantastic thing out of this movie is that there, in this movie are, Spider-Man and Elizabeth Salander. I mean, two of the greatest parts of, of this or any year. I mean, my hope for this is that people will look back on this movie as one of those amazing ensembles where you got to meet, it's like the cast of Diner or the cast of American Graffiti or Last Picture Show, where you sort of say, this is a whole generation of astonishing actors who all showed up at this one moment in time in this one film describing exactly where the culture is. So hopefully it's like the whole thing feels like lightning in a bottle, including the cast.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us ever look at it as how smart we are, as just how fortunate we are
Very
that
lucky,
we get
yes.
to work with these actors at this time in their life, this stage in their career. We feel very, very fortunate to be able to do that.
I mean, one of the great things about David is David creates, without the slightest intention of doing it, David creates acolytes. And when you work with him, you are on the train that he, of which he is the conductor. And you are going as fast as he is, and you're not getting off until the train pulls into the station, which is about a year and a half after you get on it. And
But let me tell you, you don't want off. You're
no,
the
you
most
really,
fun
it's the
ride
truth.
you will ever go on.
It's absolutely true, and I mean, he's a very, very inspiring guy to work with. And one of the best things for me personally about working on this movie was I felt like he brought out the best work I ever did as a producer, and that's that's a great, great feeling to have, that somebody who's working at 100% of their capacity at every minute of the day is requiring that you do the same. And he did that with the actors. And Jesse told me this fantastic story that he was so invested in his relationship with David that at one point he was on the set and he watched David go over and talk to Armie Hammer. And it was the first time he realized that David was the director of everybody in the movie. And he said it was sort of heartbreaking to him because he suddenly realized he didn't just have David to himself.
You brought up the great Armie Hammer, who for me is like the real discovery of this movie, playing the Winklevi. Did you ever consider casting real twins?
Yes, of course we did. We did. But, we knew that was probably unrealistic, but why not take a shot at it? And
I remember I tried to get you to look at the Treadaway twins. Remember
yes,
those
we
two
did.
British
I think
boys?
we did.
Yeah.
We did.
So-
I had a whole list. Remember,
Yeah,
I sent you a list
I
one
do.
day, and Scott sends me an email and goes, "This is hilarious," because one was a whole list of twins, real
Yeah.
twins, all
Really?
over the world.
Exactly.
Yeah, but and a lot of them, they weren't. There were some, of course, that acted, but other ones that we did, and we found that they modeled or they were athletes, but
A lot of athletes. A lot of them were athletes. Yeah.
A lot of athletes. But we knew that acting was the most important here. And, Armie was somebody that we saw very early on and quite enjoyed a lot. And, Armie embodies many characteristics of the Winklevi, and Josh as well, and was someone that we met early on. And I remember the first time we knew they weren't identical, of course, but I remember the first time they actually walked in the room to read together, and I looked at and went, wow, they actually look so similar to one another. That
This is Josh Pence?
Josh Pence, who plays
which
what-
was pretty crazy.
Josh Pence plays what David refers to as the clavicles down Winklevoss.
Those two, I mean, they met coming in to audition, and they were so sweet because they're always like, it could have been one of those like really passing moments. They're like, oh, I don't know about that. He might be getting my job, but they are the best
They're
of
great
friends.
guys.
They will be friends for the rest of their lives, and they were perfect match. The two of them, they're very similar, but they're very, very distinctively different, and they did a great job. And Armie's,
I met at the premiere in New York. The actual Winklevi came.
which
Oh,
is a
wow.
little
And
funny.
and it was so shocking to see
Yeah.
two of them.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. Sort of like,
Wow.
wow, it's actually true. There really are two people who are 6'5" and 200 pounds, and they're like startlingly great looking
Yeah,
and
they look
gigantic.
great. Yeah.
That's funny because I met Armie Hammer at a party and I was weirded out there was only one of him.
Exactly.
It's very strange. But I want people to know that Josh, he wasn't just a stand-in.
No, Josh was not a stand-in. Josh was a very, very integral part of the twins, and he is an actor, and he worked as an actor every single day.
And incredibly, I mean, to his credit, incredibly generously.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an astonishing thing he did because he is 50% of what those two parts are, and you never see his face in the movie. But so much of the behavior is,
Exactly.
I mean, Armie modeled what he was doing as the brother he wasn't playing on what Josh was doing. So they had to work out this. It's like the Lucy Harpo episode, where they had to work out how they were going to mirror each other.
And I think, and you see that because even though they're identical, they're so different. Their physicality is so different. The way they move, the way they hold their hands, their energy, their personalities, and it's great. Every time I see it, it makes me really smile and go, "Wow, it's incredible what they did." And of course, that's David. He really, again, knows how to get in there, and he's such an amazing director, and he's so incredible with actors, but really encourages and supports every person's individuality, and that's why you're there. And you see it in the twins, even though you don't see Josh's face.
And who had the, what now seems brilliant idea to cast Justin Timberlake?
Probably right.
Well,
Who wants to take credit for it?
Not me.
you know, I don't like to take credit because it is a collaborative. But I think that somehow down the pike, I had met Justin a few months before, and I thought, wow, he's so interesting. And of course, all I know of Justin, quite frankly, was my niece. When she was 6 or 7 years old, walked around in a shirt that said Mrs. Timberlake, and she showed up visiting me in a suitcase that said that, and I was like, oh my gosh. So that's really what I knew, and not to, so I knew he was a big star, but I wasn't that familiar with his music. So when I met him, I remember, thinking, my gosh, he's so substantial and he's so interesting, and he's so great, and of course we talked about David, and then as we started casting, it came up in some of the list, and I went to David and I said, this is like something. At first I went, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, is this something that that we should pursue? And then the more we really started thinking about it, we were like, yeah, we love him, and he's really spectacular,
and
in all levels, great.
And I think also David had an instinct that because Sean Parker is a star to these two boys, that having somebody who knew what it was like to kind of change the temperature in the room when they walk in would be a great thing for Jesse and Andrew as well. But not just for who would play Sean Parker, but what the guy playing Sean Parker would do to up the stakes in the story. And to Justin's credit, he allowed himself to be put through a pretty exhaustive casting process. I mean, he did. He came in and read many times. He tested. He went through everything that everybody else went through and wanted to play the part. I think he knew what it would mean to be in this script, in this part with this filmmaker. And he's a very, very shrewd, very smart, ambitious guy who has things he wants to prove about himself, and he's very open-hearted and very generous, and is willing to say, I'll put it on the line, same as everybody else.
Yeah, he does not. I mean, he comes into the room as an actor on the same level with everybody else. He's patient, he's kind, he is so well prepared when he walks in the room, and he works really, really hard. And he never complained one time, did he?
No, he's amazing.
Never one time. And the more you spend time, of course, that's what we did with everybody. But the more you spend that time, you really you see how appropriate and how perfect they are for the role.
And he's got
he wanted that.
And he has
he's very smart. He wanted the role.
And he's got the biggest, showiest scene in the movie. He's got the Ruby Sky scene where he's got a gigantic speech and had to scream it for 2 days, but did it brilliantly, I think.
We were talking earlier, before the camera was on, about casting unknowns. If you're, I know that you just cast Rooney as the very coveted lead in Girl with Dragon Tattoo. Do you sometimes find it's better to cast an unknown versus someone established?
It's interesting because I've actually had a lot of phone calls about this from people who really want to talk about that as a choice, but it's not like you always want to cast the best person for the role.
Yeah,
that's what you do. You don't set out, at least we don't, and how we all work together. Your wish and your desire and your focus is the best person. If it's an unknown, that's fantastic. If it's someone who's well known, that's fantastic too. But you don't ever want to limit yourself by, we knew that with that particular character, there were so many things going on that we needed the perfect person, but also a person that people could project onto them what they believe to be Lisbeth Salander, because so many people are familiar with the book.
That's the great thing about not having a star is the audience has a much more basic relationship with the character, because they're not bringing the 15 other roles they've seen the person play, and they're just bringing what you show them. I mean, what Rooney's doing in Dragon Tattoo is, I think, startling, because you've never seen her, or you've seen her in this, 2 scenes in this film, in which she's completely unrecognizable in Dragon Tattoo. But I think it's the same thing you get with Jesse, which is, it's a fantastic thing to have someone who you just don't know that well, so you get the sort of startling energy of what David and Jesse and Aaron pulled together to represent this character.
So I know all the unknown actors out there want to know now, how can they get seen by you? Where are some of the unusual places you found talent, or do you take blind submissions?
I do take blind submissions. Of course, when you're doing something like that and there's thousands of things coming in at a day, you're not going to, it's very difficult to go through all that and to clock it. But, you know, certainly we took submissions from and I said no not to anybody, not for Social Network or for Dragon Tattoo. If you wanted to be seen, I can't physically, of course, see everybody that wants to be seen, but again, that's what's wonderful about the internet, and is that anybody that wanted, we had things posted for people to go in. There was an email address, send it, and I do look at everything. Yeah. I do. I look at everything. I filter it through, and I enjoy that. I love it, and it's very exciting, and so yeah.
And you don't always use it for just the movie you're working on. Exactly. I mean, you use it for any movie. I do, 4 or 5 movies a year, and there are people we saw in this movie who have been in other movies that we're doing because I saw them here.
Yeah. And you found some talent in some pretty unusual places. For those of you who don't know, Scott produced True Grit. You guys discovered the amazing Haley Steinfeld.
Yeah, that was and at the last possible moment. So, about 10 days before we started the movie, and we just found the best story like this of my career is with this movie that Stephen Daldry's directing, which is about a 12-year-old boy, and it's a gigantic, monumental role. I saw a boy on Kid Jeopardy, and that's who got the part.
Not an actor.
So, 10,000 kids later, we looked at 10,000 kids, and he got the role.
And he wasn't even interested in acting?
He's a science kid. I mean,
but not that many kids at 12 years old are really interested in acting. I mean, there are,
that's right.
Of course, a select few that are known from early on. That's exactly what they wanted to do. But most kids at that age, I don't know, maybe I'll try that. It's not something that, they're playing football or they're going to ballet.
That's right.
So.
This kid insisted when we cast him, he came in 3rd place last year in the United States Geography B, and he's convinced that this year he can win. So the only caveat he insisted on when we cast him in the movie was that he'd be able to go to Washington to be in the Geography B. So those are his days off. Otherwise, he works every day of the 72-day schedule.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Just as big a part as Tom Hanks and Sandra Bullock?
Bigger.
Wow.
They are playing the supporting roles. He's the lead. He's in every scene. He narrates the movie. It's a gigantic, huge, movie-defining role. And he's an astonishing kid. And part of it is, I think, he's so incredibly unself-conscious. He just is himself, and he's able to be himself with no filtration. And he has an interesting challenge because he's got to learn to repeat and to do things in the way that actors in films do all the time. I mean, the pure physical tasks of manufacturing a movie, he has no knowledge of at all. But he will learn all those things. But the thing that he is and the thing that he brings with him is completely remarkable. And you could see it on Jeopardy. I mean, literally, he showed up, and you could see this kid had ferocious intelligence and wit and imagination. And imagination is something you can't give someone. They either have it or they don't.
I know that you have like 12 movies to be producing right now. So I just want to take a question from the audience. Olivia J. Fox, who has very nice handwriting. The Social Network has a fabulous ensemble cast, and you've put together many other great ensembles. What's the secret of finding a great ensemble cast, but making sure you have actors who will keep the characters distinct and specific?
Well, I think that when you put together actors who, oh gosh, that's a difficult question. Let me think about that. What's the great big secret? It's you spend a lot of time casting, and you spend a lot of time with actors, and you find
combinations of people. I think. Don't you think?
Combinations of people. It's a combinations of people, and it's. You look at each individual character and each individual actor, but you look at the big picture as well. You always step back, and it's like putting together a family. I think for me, you know.
I think that's right.
It's like putting together family,
A,
you
lo-
know.
a lot of it is also, I think, thinking what is the job of each character in the story? What part of the story does someone have to tell? And does each person you add to it allow the story to get told? I mean, I remember years ago when I worked at Fox, I was working with Jim Brooks, and he told me, I've never forgotten this, that every decision he makes on a movie is based on, if he decides this, can the movie still be great? And I thought it was sort of an amazing thing to hear. And I think that's sort of what you and David did.
Yeah, and I will say too that for David and I and Scott, absolutely, it's that you always remember every single character is just as important as the other.
Yeah.
If they work one moment, one day, or they work 8 months, every single person is there for a reason, and you want them to be memorable, and you want them to be important, and so I think that's
right. I agree.
a real key.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much, and congratulations.
Thank you for having
on a
us.
Smart, wonderful movie. Thank you, guys.